Germany, 1922, a nation in the shadow of the First World War. The economy was in free fall. Inflation was spiraling out of control. Political unrest was everywhere. People were desperate, traumatized, and trying to survive in the wreckage of a lost empire. It was in this fragile, fractured country that one of the most chilling and mysterious crimes in history took place. A crime that to this day remains unsolved. A crime that took place in the quiet countryside of Bavaria, on a lonely farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, and everything about it will haunt you. The Hinterkaifeck farm was located about 70 kilometers north of Munich, between the Bavarian towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. The name Hinterkaifeck comes from Kaifeck, a small nearby hamlet, with Hinter meaning behind in German, so it literally referred to the farmstead behind Kaifeck. It was isolated, quiet, and surrounded by dense woods. The farm was owned by the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, 63, a domineering and often disliked man known for being harsh and secretive. Kazilia Gruber, 72, his wife, quiet and obedient, largely overshadowed by Andreas. Victoria Gabriel, 35, their widowed daughter, who had returned to the farm with her 2 children after her husband died in WWI. Kazilia Gabriel, 7, Victoria's daughter. Joseph Gabriel, 2, Victoria's son, whose paternity was unclear and controversial. Living with them was also their maid, though at the time of the murders, the previous maid had recently quit, citing the house was haunted. She had heard footsteps in the attic, voices. She felt watched. The Grubers dismissed it. 6 months later, they hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, age 44. She arrived on the farm on the 31st of March, 1922. She would be dead by morning. As the Gruber-Gabriel household fell silent, life in the nearby village of Grobern carried on. But over the next few days, something strange began to ripple through the small, tight-knit community. Normally, Victoria Gabriel and her daughter Kazilia were regular attendees at church. Victoria sang in the choir, and little Kazilia often came with her. But that Sunday, the 2nd of April, 1922, they were conspicuously absent. Parishioners noticed. Questions were whispered, but not immediately acted upon. Then the postman began to report something odd letters and newspapers were piling up at the Hinterkaifeck home. No one was collecting the mail. The milkman, too, said something was wrong. The milk he delivered was still sitting out, untouched. No one had come to the door in days. When the children from the nearby school also failed to appear, and Victoria's daughter remained absent without excuse, the alarm finally began to sound. A group of concerned neighbors, including Lorenz Schlittenbauer, Victoria's former suitor and alleged father of hosts, volunteered to go and check on the family. What they found upon arriving at Hinterkaifeck would stain their memories for the rest of their lives. On the 4th of April, 1922, Schlittenbauer and 2 others, Michael and Johann Siegel, walked the kilometer-long path from Grobern to the Hinterkaifeck farm. They approached cautiously. The farmyard was eerily quiet. The animal scows, chickens, and even the family dog were all still alive, though clearly distressed. The front door was locked. No one answered. Then they entered the barn. There, buried beneath hay and straw, were the first 4 bodies: Andreas, Kazilia Sr., Victoria, and young Kazilia. Blood had soaked into the floorboards. Their faces were mutilated beyond recognition. One skull had been cleaved nearly in 2. Victoria's head was bashed in, but she was found with her hands clasped, as if in prayer. Most chilling of all was the body of young Kazilia. Her jaw had been shattered, her face beaten so violently that clumps of her hair were found in her own hands. Medical examiners later theorized that she had been alive for several hours after the attack, possibly crawling in agony next to the corpses of her family, dying slowly and alone in the cold Bavarian barn. It was a scene so horrifying that one of the men who discovered it reportedly vomited on the spot and refused to return to the property ever again. After finding the bodies in the barn, Schlittenbauer and the others cautiously moved into the main house. Inside, they found the remaining 2 victims, the maid, Maria Baumgartner, and little Joseph. Maria lay dead in her bedchamber, still in her dress, her head crushed with the same precision and savagery as the others. Beside her was the suitcase she had arrived with just the day before. She had barely unpacked. Joseph, the 2-year-old boy, was found murdered in his crib in Victoria's room. His tiny body had been struck in the face with a blunt object, likely the same pickaxe-like mattock that had killed the rest. A homemade crib curtain had been drawn across his bed, as if to shield the grisly sight from view, or to cover it in some grotesque gesture of shame or regret. The murders had been brutal, intimate, and executed with a disturbingly methodical precision. Each victim had been killed with multiple strikes to the head. There were no signs of a struggle, no screams reported by neighbors, and no immediate indication of forced entry. Whoever had done this had lured the adults one by one into the barn, slaughtered them in succession, and then entered the home to finish off the helpless maid and child. But the most unsettling detail wasn't the manner of death, it was what happened after. Someone had remained at the farm. Neighbors later testified that smoke had been seen rising from the chimney in the days following the 31st of March. Animals had been fed, the cows had been milked, the dog had been fed, even though it was injured. Fresh bread had been baked. Meals had been eaten. Whoever had killed the family hadn't simply left, they had stayed. The killer had lived on the farm with the bodies for at least 3 days, maybe longer, sleeping in the same house, moving through the rooms, tending the animals, keeping the routines of life going while death festered in the next room, and then vanished without a trace. When police finally arrived on the scene, summoned by Schlittenbauer and the others, they found little evidence to work with. The scene had already been contaminated by curious locals who had wandered through the house. People had touched objects, moved things, even cooked in the kitchen. Someone reportedly took a souvenir from the crime scene, a ghoulish memento. Despite the chaos, investigators did what they could. Autopsies were conducted on site, in the barn. In a grim and desperate move, the heads of all 6 victims were removed and sent to Munich for further forensic examination. The belief was that by studying the skulls, perhaps new clues would surface. But the science of the time offered little help. The murder weapon itself was missing, though police would later discover it hidden in the attic during a later search. It was a mattock, a small hand pickaxe used for farming. The blade matched the wounds. The handle bore traces of blood. But fingerprints, DNA, surveillance synonymy of that existed in 1922. All the police had were testimonies, gut instincts, and rumors. And they had no idea who would have committed such a calculated, monstrous act. The investigation that followed would span years, interview over 100 people, and chase dozens of leads. Yet, in the end, every path led to a dead end. Theories emerged, some logical, some absurd. Whispers filled the village. Accusations flew, and no one was ever charged. The mystery of Hinterkaifeck was just beginning. The list of suspects was long. At the top was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who discovered the bodies. He had once been romantically involved with Victoria Gabriel, and rumors swirled that he might be the father of her son, Joseph. Some speculated that he had grown resentful when Victoria refused to marry him, or when Andreas Gruber intervened. There were also suspicions around his behavior at the scene. Schlittenbauer had seemingly opened locked doors with ease, suggesting he might have had a key. He appeared unusually calm during the discovery, even moving the bodies himself. Some claimed he walked through the house with knowledge of its layout. Was it familiarity or guilt? Yet nothing concrete ever tied him to the murders. He was questioned extensively, even decades later, but never arrested. Then came the theory involving a vagrant or itinerant laborer, someone passing through, desperate and violent. But why would such a person kill an entire family, stay to care for animals, bake bread, and then vanish without taking money, valuables, or food? The crime was too personal, too controlled, too deliberate. Other theories pointed to Victoria Gabriel's troubled past. In 1915, both she and her father Andreas had been convicted of incest, a crime for which Andreas served a year in prison, and Victoria spent a month. It was whispered that Joseph might actually be Andreas's child, the result of continued abuse, that made him both son and grandson. This chilling possibility led some to speculate that the murders were the result of revenge. Perhaps someone who had learned of the incest, someone who saw Joseph as an abomination and sought to cleanse the household. Even more bizarre was the idea that the killer lived in the attic in the days or weeks leading up to the murders. Some locals believed this, explained the footsteps the former maid had heard. Someone watching, listening, waiting. The killer may have stalked the family for days, learning their patterns before striking. In one version of this theory, the killer was already on the property when the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived. He watched her settle in, then made his move that night. It would explain why no dogs barked, why no one ran, why the adults were led to the barn quietly, one by one, like lambs to slaughter. But no physical evidence of someone living in the attic was ever found, and again, no suspect. Perhaps most haunting of all were the letters. After the murders, the police received anonymous notes from people claiming knowledge of the crime. One letter, from a woman, said she had been in a relationship with a man who had told her of killing a farmer's family in Bavaria. Another came from someone confessing to the crime in cryptic, rambling detail, but the story didn't match the facts. These could have been hoaxes, or they could have been the killer, gloating in secret. Years passed, leads dried up. The skulls, sent to Munich for analysis, were lost during World War II, never returned to the family, never recovered. Without them, any hope of re-examination was gone forever. Eventually, the farm itself was torn down. In 1923, a year after the murders, the Hinterkaifeck farmstead was demolished. Nothing remains of it today but an unmarked field and a small shrine where the house once stood. Yet the story refuses to die. The Hinterkaifeck murders continue to haunt historians, investigators, and armchair detectives around the world. Books have been written, documentaries made, endless theories debated, but no matter how far we dig into the past, the truth seems just out of reach. Perhaps the killer was someone known to the family, someone who blended into village life, a neighbor, a friend, someone still alive when the bodies were buried. Or perhaps, and this is what chills the soul, it was someone who simply vanished into the forests of Bavaria, never to be seen again. In the decades since the Hinterkaifeck murders, the case has taken on an almost mythical status in Germany, and beyond a true crime enigma frozen in time, soaked in folklore, suspicion, and unanswered questions. In 2007, nearly 85 years after the crime, students at the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy took on the case as a cold case study. They meticulously reviewed the surviving records, photographs, and police reports, applying modern criminal analysis to the century-old horror. They concluded that the most likely suspect was indeed someone from the immediate area, someone familiar with the layout of the farm, the routines of the family, and capable of moving undetected. Though the students formed a primary suspect based on their findings, out of respect for surviving relatives, the identity was never released to the public. The idea that the mystery has technically been solved, and yet the truth withheld only deepens the intrigue surrounding Hinterkaifeck. There is something almost cinematic about the case. The isolated farmhouse, the eerie signs leading up to the killings, the methodical slaughter, the killer who stayed behind to live among the dead, and the total disappearance afterward. It feels like something from Gothic fiction, and yet it's horrifyingly real. People have speculated endlessly. Some believe Schlittenbauer was involved, either as a jilted lover or as a man trying to cover up a dark secret about Joseph's parentage. Others think perhaps Victoria had enemies beyond the village, that her past, her relationships, or even her rumored attempts to move away had made her a target. A few even float the idea of a military deserter, hiding in the woods since the war, half mad and full of rage. But none of these theories can fully explain every chilling detail. Who lured the victims to the barn one by one without a fight or alert? Why were the bodies so carefully covered, as if with remorse? Why did the killer stay, feed the animals, bake bread, and then leave as silently as they came? Why was the weapon hidden in the attic, not discarded? And why was the family dog injured but not killed? Questions without answers, evidence without resolution, a mystery locked in time. Even the land itself seems to have rejected the memory. Nothing remains of the Hinterkaifeck farmstead today. Just open fields, trees whispering in the Bavarian wind, and a simple cross marking where the house once stood. It's a quiet place now, peaceful. But if you stand there long enough, some say you can feel it, a chill, a stillness, a presence, as if the ground remembers what happened, as if the souls of Hinterkaifeck have never truly rested. And perhaps, until the truth is known, they never will.